I was able to help start the Lebanon Museum Foundation. Linda is a founding member, and Jolie Root is one of our board members. So we have three of us here today from the museum. And we have been doing these programs now for about 7 years, actually. And it's hard because we don't get the word out, or not everybody hears, and it's on social media. So if you want to get the word out, we have some great programs. We don't have a building yet. However, recently, we were able to get a spot in Camelia's Candles on Main Street. And we actually have a location there. We have some of our things in there, and we have a little bit of a display. So if you're on Main Street, you get a chance to go into her candle shop. She's redecorating, remodeling. Our spot is there, and we have a display. We've got some phones and some kind of interesting stuff from kind of the old days. So it's a neat little display, and we can share that with you. And we're still looking for a building, so we're still looking for a place to actually to house our things and also to display the things. There's kind of two different things with the museum. And so one of the things that we have done is we've purchased rental on a secure, safe, and temperature-controlled storage locker. So we put most of our displays, everything in there, our acquisitions and things. So they're safe and they're good, but we really want to have a place where we can share them. So anybody knows a place, or you see someone that has a building, you can recommend, hey, maybe talk to the museum. Because we need to get this museum physically in town. Yeah. And we've been working on it for years, and we will continue to work on it. We're doing good. We're getting a little further each time, so we hope that if you can, that you could donate. We have a little donation box here at the table. Anything helps, especially with our expense now of, maybe, I don't know, about $800 or $900 a year for this storage locker. And so we do have that expense now that we didn't have before. So if you could help us out with that, that would be great. Okay, tonight's speaker is one of my friends, Linda. She lives down the street, and she's right around the corner, one of my neighbors. And she's been on the board since we started. And we've had a long trudge of this at times, but it's really going well now with all these things I was just telling you about. Linda has been passionate about the history of Lebanon and our museum, and she's also passionate about gardening, as many of you know, so a garden club here. And so if you ever see her house, you will know that she is an avid gardener and loves to garden. And so she's got this book, and we want to present her to you so she can tell you about her book and the story, and it really sounds fascinating. I'm looking forward to it. So, Linda Seidrick.
All right, if it gets too dark, we can turn back on the lights. This is the first time I've made this presentation. The book is just out, so I don't know how long it's going to take. We'll aim for about 45 minutes. If it goes much longer than that, I'll just cut it short so we can have some time for Q&A. Okay. I want to tell you how I got this idea, because some of you may not even know who the Lewellings are. And if you don't, thank you for coming anyway. You trusted me that this would be an interesting subject. It was my son Ben who mentioned, he's the editor of Oregon Humanities, and he mentioned that somebody had suggested that they should have an article about the Lewellings in one issue that he just published, but he didn't have a writer for that article, and I thought, he could have asked me, because I felt like I knew a lot about the Lewellings. I was certainly interested in them, so let's see if I can, part of the reason was these books. The one on the left was published in 1953, and it is based on the story of Henderson Lewellings bringing 700 grafted fruit trees on the Oregon Trail from Iowa to Oregon in 1847. It's loosely based on that story. And this other one was published in 2008. I remember when this one was published. And it seems to be loosely based on the tree wagon. So it's even more loosely based on the Llewellyn story, but it still got people talking about Henderson Llewellyn. You can see the subtitle is being the slightly true narrative of how brave pioneer father brought apples, peaches, pears, plums, grapes, and cherries, and children across the plains. I also knew about this. This is the Royal Anne cherry, and it came to Oregon on Henderson Lewellings' wagon. It was always called a Napoleon, but Henderson changed the name, and nobody is sure why, but probably the label was hard to read, and he just misread it. And if you look at the words Royal Anne and compare it to Napoleon, you can kind of see that. Though neither really sounds like a name that a Quaker would give to a cherry. And this cherry is most used for this product on the left, developed at Oregon State University. This is an imitation of Marasca cherries in maraschino liqueur that was developed to have no alcohol, and the cherries needed to be brined in a special way, and they have to be dyed, and so yeah. So I knew about that. I also knew about this cherry, the Bing, the archetypal black cherry, and the Bing was developed by Seth Lewelling. He is Henderson's youngest brother, or younger brother, not youngest brother, sorry. And he is shown here with something that's supposed to look like Bing. That in the center, that's what's called a spirit photo. It's something that spiritualists liked. It's really a photographic trick. So that's supposed to be Bing, but he's portrayed as a Mandarin. And really, he probably looked more like this guy on the right. This photograph was taken in Portland about the time that Bing would have been working for Seth. So this was an interesting cherry, partly because of the name. It was named for Seth's Chinese worker, and that sort of naming was unusual. I also knew about this cherry, the Black Republican. And it's another interesting name. And I knew about this one because I worked on the Slow Food Ark of Taste. The Ark of Taste is an international catalog of foods that are somehow endangered, foods that are forgotten. And the Black Republican was the first Oregon food to be put on the Ark of Taste. And it was already on the Ark when I got involved, and it took me the longest time to find out who had nominated it. And I won't go into that story. But anyway, the name really intrigued me. I knew that Black Republican did not mean a Republican who is black. It was a political slur that was used in the middle of the 19th century. And it was used with great relish by Asahel Bush, the editor of the Statesman in Salem. And he used it especially against his fellow editors. So here he's made a little picture portraying Thomas Dreyer, the editor of the Oregonian, showing him with a lot of liquor bottles, although the guy was a believer in temperance. And the picture of Dreyer is interesting because it kind of looks like a minstrel. And I can't really tell, but I think maybe he's supposed to even have blackface. So it's a conflation of people with a political position that Bush did not like with black people, whom he also did not like at all. I knew about this too. This is Henderson Lewelling's house in Salem, Iowa. It's a stone house, very special for its time and place, and it's still there. It is now the Llewellyn Quaker Museum. And Henderson lived there, and he was involved in the Underground Railroad there, and there is a a little cellar space that's separated from the rest of the basement. It's only accessible from a hole in the kitchen floor. And that's where he's said to have hid slaves, escaped slaves. I also knew about Henderson's trip in 1859. He got a bunch of people together, mainly relatives, to found a utopian colony in Honduras. And this is actually Belize, but close enough. It was a spiritualist colony and a free love colony, and it ended quickly as people started dying of malaria and typhoid, and they came home and the ship was wrecked at Mazatlan on the way back. So I knew about that. And I also knew about John, the third brother of this story. John was just 2 years younger than Henderson, was very close to him, and he ended up, after working for a couple of years with Henderson in Oregon, moving to California, and he was a prominent orchardist and nurseryman there, and he ended up being quite a viticulturalist involved with the start of the Napa Valley wine industry. This list I put together for historians that I'm going to talk to, but you can see how I got into this project. I have to check my notes. I may have been, maybe that I was supposed to say something else here. Okay, yeah. I had, at this point, I realized I had plenty of material for a book. And I thought that the OSU Press might publish it. But what I wanted to know is questions like, how did the Brothers Quaker past affect their lives on the West Coast? To what extent did they remain political reformers? And then, because this was all during COVID, and I had a sense of needing to withdraw from the society and at the same time missing society, I wanted to know in what ways the brothers worked together to ensure one another's success, and how close they remained throughout their lives, and how they extended their ways of cooperating within the family and in the Quaker meeting to their neighbors, to other farmers, and to wider society. So anyway, my research, because it was during COVID, it started online, and I realized that other historians had not looked for the Lewellings in online newspaper databases, which are so valuable. We really need to get all our newspapers into these databases if we can. They also hadn't looked much at the Quaker records. And when it became possible, when I could get into the archives, physical archives, those were really helpful, especially the Oregon Historical Society. And at the Oregon Historical Society, I found this. This is Seth's journal from 1850 to 1853. So from the time he left, he was in Indiana, not in Iowa, I'll explain that. But from the time he left Indiana to go participate in the gold rush, and then go to Oregon and work with Henderson through 2 winters, return to the gold rush, and then go back, then work some more and start his own nursery, build his house. That's all in this one journal, which was missing. There's a transcript at the University of Oregon and one at the California State Library, a typed transcript, but it's missing pieces. The transcriber noted that he'd left parts out that he didn't think were important. And there are also things that were changed from the original, and I was able to find the original in the at the Oregon Historical Society. They didn't know that it was there. It wasn't all there. Some of it was missing, but it was just a great find. And I think that it was kept for a while by Seth and John together, which is especially interesting. So, okay, I want to run through the course of their lives. Henderson was born in 1809, John in 1811, Seth in 1820. They were in a family of 8 children, and then their dad, Meshach, would go on to have 3 more children with a second wife. They started in North Carolina in what's called the Quaker District in the North Carolina Piedmont. You can see New Garden, Back Creek, and Salisbury. So their meeting was the Back Creek meeting. There were Quakers elsewhere in North Carolina, but these were particularly radical Quakers. And what they were really radical about was slavery. They didn't like it. The slave trade was increasing because of cotton culture, and slaveholders were running the North Carolina government, and they were making it hard to free slaves and for freed blacks to live there at all. They would often be captured back into slavery. So it was a really difficult time, and they were pretty radical people. They also had some other things going on, that there was a shortage of land for their big families because the boys were supposed to be given farms. The girls had to marry into land. The soil was getting depleted. So they wanted to move over the mountains, and there was a lot of push to move over the mountains. The British had kept that from happening, but the Americans were doing it. I have to explain the Quaker word meeting. It refers to a church, or they didn't use the word church, a church or a congregation, and also it's regional. So you have your weekly meeting, which is local. You have your monthly meeting, which represents a bigger area, and then your annual meeting represents a really big region. So the annual meeting included North Carolina and part of South Carolina. The annual meeting ended up the biggest owner of slaves in North Carolina because it was because Quakers were not allowed to have slaves. So that if they, say, inherited some slaves, they would give them to the annual meeting, and then those blacks would be protected and would be able to live more or less as free people, and their children would be educated, but really, they were still slaves. So the annual meeting wanted to get these blacks out of North Carolina, and they learned that there were no laws in Ohio, Indiana, or Illinois against bringing in blacks. So that's what they did. As groups of Quakers, and they would travel in groups, left the state, they would take some blacks with them and free them where they went. And a whole lot of the people from this Piedmont area went to Indiana. And Richmond was the town where they congregated, or they went through there and they settled near there. I need to explain about grafting too. So the favorite fruit at this time was not the cherry, but the apple. And apples don't come at all true from seed. For the most part, Americans didn't care. They plant their apples from seed, and if you take apples, seedling apples from a bunch of different trees and mash them together, you get a pretty good cider, and that was really what they cared about. And by cider, I don't mean sweet cider. That has to be pasteurized or frozen or something. In about 3 days, sweet cider turns to hard cider. And it would be kept in barrels and drunk all day. And it really was a temperance drink, but it was starting to be kind of questionable that way because it was often mixed with apple brandy. So, and the Quakers were great believers in temperance as well as the quality of human beings and the end of slavery. So anyway, the way you graft a tree is you put a scion, a little twig, onto a tree that's already in place, or a bare root tree, which you'll then plant. And this just shows different ways of doing that. And I included the root graft because that becomes important later in the Lewellings story. Root grafting was invented in the 1820s by a teenager who saw the roots of an apple tree turned up in the field, and he cut up the roots and attached scions to them. And he found that one tree could produce so many other trees through root grafting. And so that root grafting became the way the West got covered with fruit trees very, very quickly. They went to Indiana, and you can see Wayne County and Randolph County were strong Quaker counties. But the Lewellings decided to go further into what was really wilderness. It just had been opened up. Another principle of the Quakers was you couldn't go settle on any land that hadn't been acquired by treaty with Indians. So even though the Indians may have been forced into making the treaty, at least they believed you shouldn't go there without a treaty. So Henry County was a heavily forested place, and they had to do a lot of cutting and burning of trees in order to plant orchards there. But that's what they did Because Meshach, the boy's father, was a grafter. I should have said that. Meshach was a farmer. He was a country doctor, probably self-educated or barely educated. And he also took up this art of grafting, which was growing more and more common among Quakers in particular, partly because of the belief in temperance, and also because they liked practical skills. But they saw value in dessert apples, eating apples, right off the tree, and making them into pies and so on. Everybody else had just drunk their apples before that. Okay, so I'm not there yet. That's Iowa. In their early 20s, Henderson and John both got married and bought 80-acre parcels of land and started orchards. They started an orchard and nursery business as partners. And they did that for some years, and then they moved their business to Iowa. And it was Henderson who went first. Henderson was the adventurer of the family, and he got his brothers to follow. He got his brothers, not Seth, because Seth was much younger and he became a shoemaker, but he got his brothers John and William to follow him. And we have a direct descendant of William here. Todd, could you raise your hand? So William was a preacher. He was a Quaker preacher. They had preachers. And he preached mostly against slavery. And shortly after Henderson left Iowa on the Oregon Trail, William was preaching in Indiana and suddenly died. So that was the end of William, but I have to tell you about one of his sons too, later. Anyway, you can see on this map all these funny lines. Those are routes of the Underground Railroad. And so you can see that Salem was a hub of the Underground Railroad. And close by, we have Missouri, and so you just have to cross the Des Moines River to escape to freedom, but you would need people to help you, and the idea was to eventually get to Canada. In Indiana, I should have said, the Lewellings remained involved in the fight against slavery and for black rights because black codes or black laws were being passed to limit the freedoms of black people. This is an ad that Henderson placed in a newspaper while they were in Salem. He just north of Salem, he established a Cedar Grove Botanic Garden and Nursery, and I never found any description of it. Was it really a beautiful botanic garden, or I don't know? But he and his brothers sold both apples and trees. They all owned their own orchards, but they worked in the business together. And you can see, he said they had on hand 36,000 apple trees. So this was a big business. And it was not just retail, but also wholesale. He was looking for other nurseries that would want to sell his trees. Or today we'd say garden centers. And he'd carry these trees in his wagon, which may have been also convenient for transporting blacks, and by boat also. He made 14 trips back to Indiana during this time that they were in Iowa. So that was in 1837 that he came, and it was 1847 that he left. He decided to leave in 1846, but finally got it together in 1847. He needed a lot of oxen to pull this big nursery wagon, and there were other wagons, and he had a group of Quakers from Salem. This map shows, it's probably pretty familiar to you, the route of the Oregon Trail, and then you can see where it broke off for the California Trail. That's where Seth and John went in 1850. And what I'd especially like to point out is that much of this country was still Mexico. So Alta California, New Mexico, and so in those lower states were all still Mexico, and Texas had just become part of the United States. But basically the United States was over there. Okay. I just want to make sure. Oh, okay. I need to go back to Iowa because I wanted to say one more thing. Besides the Underground Railroad, there was a lot of concern about their religion because the Quakers kept dividing. Other churches were dividing over the issue of slavery. They ended up starting in Salem an anti-slavery friends meeting. So they totally separated from their friends, all their old connections, and started, this one group of them started the anti-slavery friends. And they were forming alliances with other anti-slavery people outside of Quakerdom, which Quakers weren't supposed to do. And then they went even farther and got into politics. They got involved with the Liberty Party. And the Liberty Party, it was a predecessor of the Free Soil Party, which was a predecessor of the Republican Party. But it didn't do too well. Okay, so they get to the Willamette Valley. I'm going to check again to see if I missed anything. All right. And they had an Oregon Trail story, which is interesting and full of all kinds of adventures like others you would read, but I won't go through that. About half the trees survived, about half got killed in the Rockies. It got too cold. They ended up at Fort Vancouver, camped across from Fort Vancouver, and there Oregon Columbia was born, their 10th child, if I remember right.
Wow.
They named him Oregon Columbia. He later went by OC. And you can see where Milwaukee is on that map, in case you don't know, just up the river. And this is a wonderful map that was produced by the federal government because after the Whitman massacre, they decided to put an ordnance depot right on Henderson and Meek's, I'll explain who Meek is, right on their land. And so they drew a picture of the area, and you can see here's the little town of Milwaukee formed by Lot Whitcomb, who was the leader of the first wagon train that the Lewellings started with. This is Henderson's orchard. This is now the Waverly Golf Course. And when I'll tell you about Meek and Alfred, Henderson's son, going to the gold rush, they came back, and Meek and Henderson built a sawmill, and that's on the map too. This shows the Llewellyn and Meek claims as being one above the other, but they later divided it left and right. And they were partners. So here's Meek. Meek actually was the first one to bring grafted fruit trees to Oregon because he came the same year as Henderson, but he got here faster. And he and Henderson knew each other in Iowa, and probably talked about going to Oregon. And so the spring after arriving, Meek came to see Henderson. They talked for a long time, and they got together. Henderson had lost the man who would have been his partner on the Oregon Trail. And you can see the two spellings of the Llewellyn name. Henderson, soon after coming to Oregon, he changed the spelling to Lewelling. It was just part of his transition, I guess. And he also no longer looks like a Quaker. I don't know when this picture was taken. It's the only picture that's around of Henderson Llewellyn. But at some point after arriving in Oregon, he stopped wearing the Quaker hat and the Quaker coat, and he grew a beard, which Quakers did not do. Meek was not a Quaker. And here we have John and Seth, the two brothers who came to the West. Seth and John came during the gold rush in 1850, and they worked for Henderson for 2 winters, and then John went back east and got his family and settled in California. And Seth decided to stay in Oregon. When Henderson went to New York with his second wife to get more trees, to see nurseries there, he came back with Seth's family. Henderson lost his wife soon after Seth and John arrived in Oregon, and also his daughter. So people were pretty shook up by all these deaths. I should say about their nursery work. In 1851, they had 20,000 grafted trees ready for planting. In 1852, Henderson advertised purple raspberry plants in a San Francisco paper. So he had already begun shipping both fruit and plants to Gold Rush, California. So they'd gone from farming mostly for self-sufficiency to selling their fruit and trees locally and then regionally, and then to selling all the way to California, so it was becoming a real industry. Meek, by the way, ran the orchard for about 5 years after Henderson went to California. And Meek was an agent for other orchardists. So Meek made a lot of money. So this is a picture of Milwaukee. In the upper left is Seth's house, which was built as a tavern. And Seth acquired it only after a year or so after it was built. And below that is, I believe, another picture of Seth's house from the river. At the upper right is Lot Whitcomb, the founder of Milwaukee, who remained friends with Seth and Henderson. And he built the steamboat. He had built a steamboat that was the first steamboat on the Willamette River. So that was the way they got their goods to Astoria to ship to California. They needed a steamboat, and Lot provided that. Okay, now we're going to jump to John. This is, if you're not familiar with the Bay Area, it's just to help you see where things were. So John started at Mission San Jose. It was actually ex-Mission San Jose. I want to explain that now. After working in partnership with a landowner there, he acquired his own farm at San Lorenzo, which you may not have heard of. It's still unincorporated. It's just part of the metropolis. And then Henderson first acquired land at Alameda. This was in about 1854, which there, it doesn't look like an island. Today it's an island because they dug out a canal, but it wasn't then. And then there were problems with land titles. So he ended up founding Fruitvale. That was his estate. It was spelled, it should be 2 words there, Fruitvale, a name that his daughter-in-law came up with. And that was part of Brooklyn. So Oakland was a small township, and Brooklyn was a smaller township, and Fruitvale was part of that. Okay. I put in a picture of Elvie just because I wanted to have one of the wives in here, and that's the only picture I have for this first batch of wives anyway. And this is an ad for John's nursery at San Lorenzo. He was also a big-time nurseryman and orchardist, and he bought a lot from Seth. This is Henderson's place at Fruitvale in the upper left, and I don't know where that picture came from. I would really like to find a better image of that, but that gives you an idea. He built a really nice house at what is now Diamond Park. So it's uphill a little bit up here, and those people are doing Tai Chi. Those 2 trees there, I think they were planted in honor of Henderson and Luther Burbank, but I couldn't find any plaques. And that is Meek's house, which is still in another unincorporated town called Cherryland, which is right by San Lorenzo. And you can visit there. They have weddings and things. So I hope that gives you an idea of the area that we're talking about. An important part of their story is that all 3 brothers became spiritualists. And this is a religion that's easy to mock, but really, if you want to mock religions, they're all pretty easy to mock. That scene at the upper left is what Seth would call a circle. He had lots and lots of circles, and they would hold, well, a circle was basically a seance, but there were also seances that were led by somebody on a stage. the guitar, the floating guitar, is just something that, well, I can't explain that. In the lower left is a hotel that's still standing at the New Era Spiritualist Camp. It was built in 1890, so not long before Seth died. He died in 96. But this camp was a place where Seth hung out. Spiritualism was very, very popular at that time. It was no secret. It was a big religion. This is a book that was published in 1870 on the history of American spiritualism, which is really interesting because spiritualism only started in 1853, I think. Gotta find where I am. 1848. So two girls, 11 and 14 years old, in New York, were cracking their toes and dropping apples to scare their mom. And they would talk to this ghost that they told their mom was there. The family sold the house, and the girls went to live with their sister, who got the idea of profiting from this, and so she called herself a medium. I think she was the first one to use the term medium. And she became sort of the agent for the girls, and spiritualism just took off. There was more to it than that, but that's how it got started. And the New Era Church is still there. It still operates. It's not a camp, but it's still there. So if you go on New Era Road in Canby, you can see the church, which was actually built in 1938, and the hotel is still standing there. So John eventually moved up to St. Helena. He had asthma, and the Bay Area fog bothered him. In St. Helena, he was no longer a nurseryman. He grew cherries and apricots and almonds, and he grew grapes, and he made raisins. That's the house that he built. And he got involved with the St. Helena Viniculture Club. That was what they called it. It was before people started saying viticulture, I think. They said viniculture. And they got together and talked about how best to grow grapes and how to make wine. And they saw the beginnings of phylloxera, which is the little, it's called a plant louse that destroys grapevines and had destroyed the wine industry in Europe and was now hitting California. So they dealt with phylloxera, and John ended up a really important person in all that. This land is still owned by descendants of John. There are 4 great-great-grandchildren who still farm the land, with 2 great-great-great-grandchildren, and among them the family has 3 wine labels. They have the only winery in the Napa Valley that's still owned by a pioneer family. Most of them are owned by big corporations. Okay, so we're on to Seth's later life. There are lots of interesting bits in their lives that I'm just skipping altogether, but I want to talk about this. Clarissa died in 1882. That was Seth's wife. And Alfred moved back to Milwaukee. Alfred was Henderson's eldest son, and he'd been very close to his father. He helped. He drove a wagon on the Oregon Trail as a teenager. He moved to the Bay Area when Henderson did, and he had an estate next to Henderson's. He was an orchardist. He, like the rest of them, canned his own food and put it in the fairs. So Alfred and Seth were pretty close, and when Seth was pretty late in life, Alfred moved back to Milwaukee, and probably I don't have complete evidence, but I think he partnered with Seth late in Seth's life. Sophronia, here on the right, was 32 years old when she and Seth married. That was in 1885, so he was 65 and she was 32. But she'd been a friend of Clarissa, of Seth's first wife. She hung out at New Era Spiritualist Camp. And she was a very interesting person, a bold person, a feminist. She was a friend of Abigail Dunaway, a reformer of all sorts. And once they got married, she held salons in their house, the same house where Seth had always been. She had a couple children. The first one died. The second one was born in 1888. And Seth died in 96. So he, this boy hardly got to know his father. And Seth's other children had all died, which is really sad. So he ended up leaving 2 grandchildren, but no children survived him, except this Dawn, who did not have children himself. In 1890, the Farmers Alliance came to Oregon. And the Farmers Alliance kind of replaced the Grange, which the Grange had not been very successful in Oregon. It had been a big success in California and a big part of John's life. John ran the Grange Bank. And the Grange started co-ops of all kinds and dealt with transportation. And they did all these things to help the farmer. But in Oregon, they didn't accomplish as much. Seth never joined the Grange, but Alfred did. And then the Farmers Alliance came, and it kind of replaced the Grange. It was more political. Alfred and Sophronia, and they were about the same age, they became local leaders right away. And so they have these Farmers Alliance meetings regularly where they discuss railroad rates, the currency shortage, corrupt legislation, or a corrupt legislature, and they'd share books that they bought on politics. Uren, that's a Cornish name that I think Uren's father added the apostrophe to, so people wouldn't mispronounce it. But William Uren arrived in 1891, and Seth and Sophronia took him in, gave him a place to live. He was a lawyer, but he didn't have any work, and he was recovering from tuberculosis, and he had asthma. He needed help. He also was an avid supporter of the single tax movement. I won't try to explain that, but I know that in my own life I've seen these signs on country roads that say single tax. So the idea has not gone away, and it started in his time. Uren went on from that to other democratic efforts. He got the secret ballot passed, so Oregon had viva voce voting, so you had to stand up and say who you were voting for, and with all your precinct members around you. And then they went to tickets, which the party provided, so they were different colors, so everybody could see what ticket you were voting. So the secret ballot, also called the Australian ballot, because it started there, was something new, and he got that passed. So in one of these Farmer Alliance meetings, Alfred presented the book, Direct Legislation by Citizenship. And this was an idea that came from Switzerland. So direct legislation is basically our initiative and referendum system. This became the main topic of the Farmers Alliance meetings in Milwaukee. And this group and their friends began to organize a People's Party, or the Populist Party. So in 1893, there was this panic, nationwide, financial panic. And Seth helped out Uren by giving him a job as a nursery manager as well as a place to live. He also, at that point, gave him a share in all his and Sophronia's taxable property. I think it was actually a 1/3 share. I can't imagine why. But then in 1895, Seth had a stroke, and in 1896, Seth died, and nearly everything was lost to creditors. Sophronia was really mad. This was a total surprise to her, and she always blamed Uren for the rest of her life. She made great fusses about Uren, although he'd been her friend before. Uren went on and accomplished a lot more. He got past the direct primary so that people could actually vote for candidates before they went on the final ballot, and the direct election of U.S. senators, and a recall initiative, so we could recall people in office who weren't doing what you liked. So he accomplished a lot, and he always gave credit for his work to Sophronia, Alfred, and especially Seth, because Seth had provided so much money and encouragement and everything else he needed to get started. So how are we doing on time?
7:23.
Okay. We don't have much time left, but I'll read you quickly just 4 paragraphs from the book, from the introduction as a conclusion. And then we'll have a few minutes for questions. So what aspects of Quakerism stayed with the Lewellings? Although the brothers and their wives rejected the Friends' insularity and formalism, the Lewellings held to the primary Quaker values of honesty, equality, and pacifism. They were by all accounts gentle and kind. Quaker values supported the brothers' cooperative ventures, led Seth to give provocative names to his cherry cultivars, and prompted the Lewellings' involvement with various avant-garde social movements, from temperance to vegetarianism, feminism, spiritualism, and at least in Henderson's case, communalism and free love. Considering the Lewellings help us to see the connection among these movements and their special appeal for people with Quaker roots. Quakerism also influenced the Lewellings' choice of profession. Horticulture had been a favorite Quaker métier since at least the 18th century. The Llewellyn story reveals the role of Quaker nurserymen in promoting orchards, especially grafted orchards, as symbols of comfort, prosperity, and rectitude, and ensuring that no family would have to live without delicious, beautiful fruit. Their story also demonstrates how the apple, despite its susceptibility to pests and disease, has remained the most cherished of American fruits. If we disregard religion, politics, and social movements, the Llewellyn story still fascinates as horticultural history. We must wonder at the speed at which the brothers grafted, grew, and distributed millions of fruit trees up and down the Pacific coast. Impressive, too, are the ways they adapted to changing conditions, including Iowa's cold, Oregon's wet springs, California's long summer droughts, and advances in train and transportation. The brothers replaced barrels with boxes for packing fruit, for example, switched fruits and varieties in their orchards to suit their climates and markets, and developed their own superior cultivars. Their engagement in horticultural societies and fairs recalls for us a time when everyone cared about farming. And John's experience as a St. Helena wine grower, that group in St. Helena came up with that word, illuminates how that little town and the whole Napa Valley became a center of excellence in winemaking. The Llewellyn story is about, all at once, westward expansion, social reform, egalitarian politics, and fruit culture. I hope my telling will promote recognition of the brothers' fruits, those they brought west, those they developed, those that are famous, and those long forgotten. I hope, too, that it will foster appreciation for unorthodox strains of thought that may seem fatuous today, but that acted as a check on 19th century greed and bigotry. Most of all, I hope the book will show how the Llewellyn's cooperative spirit, and especially their dedication to one another, fostered their success both in farming and in life. Questions? Seth developed one apple, the Sweet Alice, named for his daughter who died of typhoid, I think. And some people have tasted the Sweet Alice, but it's not very common. I still haven't tasted it. The breeding was mostly cherries, also grapes. Seth also developed a rhubarb. Yeah, Paul?
When they brought fruits here, kind of came to Oregon, I'm assuming there was just kind of this, people had settled here and they had nothing like that, and they wanted fruit. Is that kind of what they were doing, selling to people who were here who didn't have access to fruit trees and those kinds of
Yeah,
things?
so Oregon had a lot of fruit, plenty of wild fruit, but it was mostly small, you know how wild fruits are, small, often sour, sometimes bitter, and they really missed apples especially. Also pears, cherries, plums, but apples especially. And so everywhere they went, Indiana, Iowa, Oregon, people settling in a new place wanted an orchard. You had to have that orchard. They planted as soon as they could.
That's my question is apple trees are often associated with land speculation. If a speculator would go plant the orchard, that land was then worth, considerably more than if it were just bare land.
Yeah, you could do that. You had to prove your claim. And with trees, you could just plant them and go away. And the trees would grow by themselves. And then you could say, yeah, I've been working the land for 5 years. When you hadn't really, and yes, it was sometimes done by speculators.
I noticed in your footnote references to some of the publications that you searched. One of them had to do with Colfax. I don't remember if it was what publication it was, but it was Colfax, and it rang a bell. Were they in that area too then in Colfax?
Yeah, so when they went back to the gold rush, Henderson went with John and Seth. Henderson's wife had just died a few weeks before, but the three of them went together, and they went to see a man who had come with Henderson on the Oregon Trail named Enos Mendenhall, and Enos's wife, whom he met in Oregon, and they had set up a business there. They had set up a sort of hotel, though it was just originally just a tiny cabin and people had tents outside, but they were feeding the miners and giving them a place to stay. And they didn't have an orchard yet. So Henderson brought all these trees and planted an orchard for them. And he probably got paid on shares somehow. I don't know. And then John and Seth planted a nursery there. So they took smaller trees and put them close together. And the idea was they would sell them later. And that is in Seth's journal that he and John had an agreement that they would sell them later and share the profits. But they were never back there to sell the trees, so I think Enos sold the trees and then gave them money for it. So that was near the present town of Colfax, and when the railroad came in, everybody moved to Colfax, and there the Mendenhalls built a proper hotel, and Enos's wife ran that for many years while Enos moved to Southern California, the San Diego area, and had a huge ranch there. So that's where Colfax comes into it.
It was interesting. I lived in Colfax for a number of years, so it rang a bell when I saw that, and I was curious what the connection
So
was.
did you read the book
I
already?
haven't read the book.
Oh, so how did you see the footnote?
No, you had it on your screen.
Oh, okay. Right, because I went to the Historical Society in Colfax. Right. Anybody else?
When is your book available?
I have copies here in the box. Margaret?
So it's quite a change from
Quakerism to spiritualism, which isn't, that's not the part that's surprising, but when you mentioned communalism and free love, was that uncommon?
No, free love was going a bit too far, and most spiritualists would have nothing to do with free love, because the term was interpreted the way, you'd probably interpret it today, or the way people did in the 60s. It's not something everybody would approve of, but feminists supported the concept of free love because it gave women a way out of bad marriages. The idea was you wouldn't get married with the government at all, and then you could just divorce whenever you wanted to. And so it was freeing to women, but often people didn't consider that a man could do the same thing. He could just abandon the family. So yeah, it didn't work out that well. But it's interesting, Henderson's possible fourth wife her obituary says she was his wife, but she was the daughter of Henderson's wife. And she may have gone to Honduras with him. His wife did not, because his wife at the time, he sold the farm. He sold this farm to the governor of California so that he could buy a ship. I mean, they needed a ship, right? So he had to buy a ship, so he sold the farm, and suddenly she was out of a home. So she filed a complaint with the government to have him declared a lunatic, so that he wouldn't be able to go, but he escaped in the night on a little boat, and it's possible that the daughter was with him.
Oh my gosh.
So that would have been his stepdaughter?
I think, yeah. Yeah.
Sounds like a soap opera.
Well, yeah. So Henderson, I think he may have lost a lot of respect when he came back, because he was in papers all over the United States as the free love, I forget. Anyway, he was quite shamed by that, and he never regained his fortune, and he died when he was burning a lot in San Jose, in the city of San Jose, which was different from Mission San Jose. He was burning off a lot so he could plant, and his brother-in-law, one of his brother-in-laws, but this brother-in-law was the brother of a free love wife, the last free love wife. They weren't married, apparently. Anyway, properly. Anyway, so the brother-in-law comes back, and Henderson is lying in the flames. He'd had a heart attack, and that's how he died, in the flames. So it was very sad, but he was planting up till the end. He had a family, he had friends, but still it was a sad ending.
At least he died doing what he liked.
Yeah.
Dying was cremated at the same time.
Anything else?
Where was Bing in all of this?
Bing. Bing went back to China.
Bought a restaurant in Lebanon.
They went back to China, I forget when, in the 1890s. But, mostly what I have in my notes here are dates, because I forget them, so I didn't write down when Bing went back to China. But then there was the Chinese Exclusion Act, and he didn't have the papers to come back. So he may have come back and got held in San Francisco and then sent back to China, or he may have never tried to come back. We don't know. But it was because of the Chinese Exclusion Act that Bing was gone forever. Bing, though, he had a wife and a whole bunch of sons in China, none of which were biologically his, but he'd been gone so long that his wife just adopted a bunch of sons so that they could do the proper ancestor rituals.
Before you guys go, this video will be on our website. Actually, it'll be on YouTube, but we'll have a link to it, so you can go and see this video. We also, if you missed any of the other talks that we've had, all those talks are on. I think we're only missing one or two, but we have almost all of our talks on YouTube, so you can go back and watch them. It's pretty cool. There's some really good ones. There's a really good one, Bob and Betty Adams from the pharmacy downtown. Just some really great talks that.
The channel is Lebanon Museum.
Yeah, it's YouTube, Lebanon Museum. Yep. And don't forget, if you don't mind, a little donation would really help us out. You can, if you can't, that's fine. But we really appreciate you coming tonight. Linda's got her books, and if you want to sit around and chat with her for a minute or two,